In the eternal darkness, the crow, unable to find any food, longed for light, and the earth was illuminated. This is an ancient Eskimo story that explains the origin of light. Simone Weil, one of the most underestimated philosophers of the past century, explains this story as follows. If there is truly desire, if the desire of the object is truly light, the desire for light will produce it. But be careful, desire is genuine only when an effort of attention is made, and we truly desire something only when all other incentives are absent. This reflection by Simone Weil comes from a short essay of hers, part of a collection of texts titled Waiting God. When I first read this essay, I completely changed my approach to studies. Everything that I was pursuing until that moment, such as grades, knowledge, or approval, all this became infinitely meaningless compared to the truth hidden between the lines of this text. Simone Weil has an incredible ability to reach deep into your soul, striking its chords and creating a beautiful melody that will resonate within you forever. Simone Weil is one of the most extraordinary thinkers of the 20th century, a philosopher who connected intellectual reflection with lived experience, social commitment with a profound exploration of existential understanding. Her life, marked by continuous confrontation with human suffering and the search for an authentic comprehension of human condition, was not merely a theoretical journey, but a tangible commitment. Intellectually gifted from a young age, Weil also demonstrated keen social awareness early on. Alongside her studies in philosophy, classical philology, and science, she constantly pursued new learning endeavors as they arose. From 1931 to 1938, she taught philosophy at various schools, often clashing with school boarders due to her social activism, which included picketing, refusing to eat more than necessary, and writing for leftist journalists. To understand psychological effects of heavy industrial labor, she took a job in an auto factory where she observed the deadly spiritual effects of machines on her fellow workers. Later, she decided to volunteer as a war partisan, despite enduring ongoing health problems, which eventually led her to death. Her philosophy did not emerge from an intellectual detachment, but from a love for knowledge that cannot be separated from life. Today, she remains one of the most precise, rigorous, and lucid thinkers, an example of how philosophical thought can be not just an intellectual exercise, but a path of total engagement with the existence. The title of the essay I was referring to is Reflection on the Right Use of School Studies with the View to the Love of God. As you may see from the title, her thought is within a religious context, and the reference to God is actually a key aspect of this text. But I decided to not focus on that part because it's easy to misunderstand in this context, and it requires a deeper understanding of her spiritual journey overall. Simone Weil asked herself since the very beginning of this text, what is the purpose of school studies? I'm sure we all ask ourselves at least once during our studies the same question. Why am I learning this? Why do I have to know how to solve a geometry problem? How to calculate an integral? How to translate from one language to another one? Nowadays, these questions are particularly legitimate considering that all this can be done much quicker and probably much better by artificial intelligence. So why are we still doing this? For Simone Weil, the answer is clear. The only and primary purpose of school studies is to build and refine our faculty of attention. Of course, each subject has its own peculiar interest, but it loses significance when we consider ourselves as whole human beings concerned primarily with our existence. Therefore, students should never say, for my part I like maths, or I like French, or I like history, but rather learn to love each subject in the same way, because they all contribute equally to build our attention. The lack of natural predisposition or capacities for geometry, for example, doesn't prevent the search for the solution and studying of a theorem, which all contributes to refine our attention. On the contrary, it's almost a beneficial circumstance. Indeed, finding a solution is not the main point. What really matters is the genuine effort we put into finding it. Never, in any way, a genuine effort of attention is wasted. If we try to solve a geometry problem with genuine attention and after 1 hour we are still at the starting point, in each minute of that hour we've still made progress, though in another, more mysterious dimension. Without even realizing it, that effort, in appearance vain, has brought more light into our souls, and one day we will see its benefit. Maybe one day, precisely because of that vain effort into solving the geometry problem, we will be able to understand a poem by Rilke or a painting by Cézanne. Certainly, we will be more aware of the beauty that surrounds us, and as you may all know, Dostoevsky says, beauty will save the world. These kind of certainties, which reveal their fruits later in time, are empirical, namely, we can experience them in our everyday life, but in order to do so, we first need to believe it. This is unfortunately the contradiction of any type of knowledge crucial for our spiritual journey. If we don't regulate our conduct according to it before having proved it, if we don't hold on it by faith, very dark and unclear at the beginning, we will never transform it into certainty. Every time that a human being succeeds in making an effort of attention with the sole idea of increasing his grasp of truth, he acquires a greater aptitude for grasping it, even if his effort produced no visible fruit. So even if we don't see this fruit, even if our effort seems unproductive for years, the day will come when a light proportioned to our effort will flood our soul. Every effort adds a little gold to a treasure no power on earth can take away. According to Simone Weil, there are two fundamental conditions of a spiritual use of studies. The first one, as we have shortly seen, is to direct our studies to the only purpose of refining our attention. This means that we shouldn't study for a grade or to pass an exam or any other academic result, and we have to do it without being concerned about our natural predisposition. On the contrary, we have to apply with the same effort to every subject. But be careful, when we attempt to solve an exercise, it's necessary a genuine desire to find the solution. The desire is fundamental for true effort. The second condition is to take great pains to examine rigorously, to contemplate calmly and carefully each task we have failed. We must learn to contemplate our failure in all its unpleasant mediocrity, without ever justifying ourselves, without overlooking even the smallest mistake, striving to trace the origin of each error. There is a great temptation to do the opposite, to look away and try a new task. We all do it, mostly because of our pride. But nothing is more necessary for those who want to achieve great results in academic studies. Because if we refuse to pay attention to our mistakes and the teacher's corrections, despite all the efforts, we keep working without making any progress. Through this hard condition, we learn the virtue of humility, a treasure infinitely more precious than any kind of academic progress. It is indeed better to contemplate our own stupidity rather than our sin. The awareness of the sin gives us a certain feeling of being evil, and this leads us sometimes to a certain pride. When we force ourselves to focus not only with our eyes but also with our soul, at a school exercise where we have failed due to sheer stupidity, we feel with undeniable evidence our mediocrity. Nevertheless, if we attain knowledge of this truth with our whole soul, we firmly establish ourselves on the right path. While the second condition, namely looking through our mistakes, depends entirely on our will, the first condition, which is paying attention, is much more complex and requires a certain awareness. Very often, attention is confused with a muscular effort. When teachers say to the students, "Pay attention," you see them contracting their eyebrows, holding their breath, and stiffening their muscles. But if you ask them 2 minutes later what did they understand, they cannot reply, because they haven't paid attention but simply contracted their muscles. During sessions of studies, there's often this waste of energy, and at the end, we feel tired and convince ourselves that we have worked hard, but it is an illusion. Fatigue has nothing to do with work. Work itself is the useful effort, whether it is tiring or not. When we study, this kind of muscle effort, although made with good intentions, is useless. This way of studying allows sometimes to succeed in academic studies or to achieve good grades. But this happens regardless the effort and thanks to natural gifts. Moreover, such studies are never of any use. Willpower, the kind that if necessary makes us grit our teeth and endure suffering, is the principal weapon of any apprentice engaged with manual work. But contrary to the usual opinion, it is irrelevant in studies. Intelligence can only be guided by desire, and for there to be desire, there must be pleasure and joy. Intelligence grows and bears fruits only in joy. The joy of learning is essential to studying as breathing is to running. Attention is an effort, perhaps the greatest of all, but it is a negative one. Therefore, it doesn't involve fatigue. When we get tired, attention is almost impossible unless we are already trained for it. At that point, it's better to let ourselves go, to relax and to try again sometime later. Attention is to leave ourselves and then return to ourselves, just like inhaling and exhaling. 20 minutes of an intense attention without tiredness are infinitely more valuable than 3 hours of application driven by muscular effort that leads us to say with a sense of duty, I have worked well. But despite all the appearances, attention is far more difficult. In our soul, there is something that resists true attention far more strongly than the body rejects fatigue. This is something much more closer to evil than it is the flesh. This is why, whenever we pay genuinely attention, we destroy a bit of this evil within us. 15 minutes of this kind of attention has the same value of many good deeds. What is attention ultimately? Attention consists of suspending our thought, leaving it available, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object. It means holding in our minds, within reach of this thought, but on a lower level and not in contact with it, the various acquired knowledge that we are forced to use. Our thought should be in relation to all particular and already formulated thoughts, as a man on a mountain who, while gazing into the distance, simultaneously perceives many forests and plains below him, without directly looking at them. Above all, our thought should be empty, waiting, not seeking anything, but ready to receive the object about to enter it in its bare truth. It is interesting that Nietzsche says something very similar in one of his works. Learning to see, accustoming the eye to calmness, to patience, to letting things come to you, refraining from judgment, learning to take in a particular case from all sides. The problem of our usual way of studying and overall our everyday approach to reality is the insisting presence of our ego. This consistent self or I, or however you want to name it, is an obstacle to knowledge because it creates barrier between us and the world, and we lose our connection to life. Too often and too quickly we think to understand things. We read something and we're already making our own connections. We listen to someone and we are sure we know what he or she is talking about. We see a person and we think that we figured out everything about his or her life. In the same way, we have no patience in the studies. All wrong translations, all absurdities in geometry problems, all faulty connections of ideas in essays. They all stem from our thought's hurry to grasp something. In this rush, our thought becomes prematurely blocked and unable to receive the truth. The most precious gifts are not meant to be sought, but awaited. Man cannot discover them by his own willpower, and if he sets out to seek them, he will instead find counterfeits, unable to discern their falsity. For each school task, there is a special way of waiting upon truth, with genuine desire, yet not allowing ourselves to search for it. A special way of giving our attention to the data of a geometry problem without trying to find the solution, or the words of a foreign language without trying to arrive at the meaning. A way of waiting when we are writing for the right word to come on its own at the end of our pen, while we are simply rejecting all the inadequate words. Happy are those students who spend their youth focusing on developing their faculty of attention. Maybe they are not as close to goodness as those who work in extreme conditions, but they are close to it in a different way. In this world, those who are unhappy, who are hard struck by life, have no need of anything but people capable of giving them their attention. This capacity to give attention is rare. very difficult, almost a miracle. Almost everyone who believes to possess this capacity doesn't have it. Warmth of heart, impulsiveness, and pity are not enough. In the first legend of the Grail, it is said that the Grail, the miraculous vessel that satisfies all hunger by virtue of being consecrated host, belongs to the first person who asked the guardian of the vessel, a king 3/4 paralyzed by a most painful wound, "What are you going through?" The love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means to being able to ask him, "What are you going through?" It is to recognize that the unfortunate person exists not as an element of totality or an example of the well-defined social category labeled as unfortunate, but as a man exactly like us who was one day struck by misfortune in its undeniable mark. For this reason, it is enough, but it is indispensable, to know how to look at him in a certain way, a gaze which, above all, is a gaze of attention, through which our soul empties itself of all its content in order to receive the being that it's looking at, just as he is, in all its truth. It is therefore true, as paradoxical as it may seem, that a translation task or a geometry problem, even if done wrong, as long as we have devoted the proper effort to them, one distant day may allow us to bring help to an unfortunate soul, help that can save them in a moment of extreme despair. Academic work is one of those fields containing a pearl so precious that it is worth selling all our possessions, without exception, in order to acquire that field.